Welcome to Now Innovating, a research to impact series at the University of Calgary. I'm your host, Julia McGregor. This episode, I speak with Dr. Eleanor Dickinson, a postdoctoral associate in the Kutz Research Group in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. Her research uses a One Health approach for wildlife health and wildlife co-management and works closely with academic and non-academic partners to develop novel approaches to wildlife health monitoring in the Arctic. She works with local communities and patrons of Arctic conservation to implement these approaches into practice. Eleanor received a 2024-2025 Innovation Postdoctoral Fellowship from the Faculty of Science for her innovative work in this area. Hi, Eleanor.
Hello.
Welcome to Now Innovating.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for coming. We're really excited to learn more about your research. To get us started, for our audience's knowledge, just describe really what One Health is and how you're using One Health approaches in your research at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine.
So One Health is a principle that combines all the different aspects of health that we have in the world. So human health, environmental health, and animal health all used to be thought of as separate things. But One Health is a principle that brings these things together because it's all connected and all the different types of health are reliant on each other. It encourages collaboration between different disciplines, and it means that we can improve human health, animal health, veterinary care, and environmental protection. All things like that can be supported by One Health.
I know we've had guests before who've looked on the human health aspect of that. So I'm interested to hear if you could tell us about the Arctic animals that your research is focusing on for that animal health approach. How are you applying One Health to your research?
We are really focused on looking at animal health, but it's also really important to think about how that impacts human health and environmental health as well, especially in the Arctic. And with the climate change occurring today, it's occurring in the Arctic at an accelerated rate, so it's having a big impact on wildlife, people, and the environment.
Thank you for that context. What are the types of Arctic animals that you're working with and focusing on with this?
The animals that our research is focusing on are caribou and muskoxen, which are the two primary ungulates found in the Arctic, especially in the Canadian Arctic. Caribou are a deer species that they migrate huge distances, and they're really important to most northern communities living in the Arctic. And muskoxen are slightly less well known. They're often thought of as the underdog of Arctic ungulates because many communities don't rely on them very heavily or at all because they rely on caribou. But there are some communities that muskoxen are really important to. They're also super important to the environment.
I think we need more sports teams named muskoxen then, if they're not thought of there. So with the caribou and the muskoxen, what are the One Health approaches then that are using for wildlife health monitoring?
So the approaches that we use, our research is really focused on community-based wildlife health monitoring. So it's really important. The people that live in the Arctic rely really heavily on caribou and muskoxen. And not only do they rely on them for food, but they also rely on them for their mental and spiritual and cultural well-being as well. We work collaboratively with communities in the north to do wildlife health monitoring, and through that we do two main approaches. The first is hunter-based sampling. So when local hunters go out to hunt a caribou or muskox, we send them with a sample kit, and they can collect samples using the sample kit, and when they return it, they get paid an honorarium or a compensation for providing us those samples. And then from that we can tell loads of different measures of health in the animals. So we can look at body condition, we can look at diseases or parasites that they may have or may have been previously infected with, and we can look at other things like their nutritional status through trace elements in hair, and stress, and there's quite a lot.
All from a sample from hunting.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
So they collect multiple samples in the sample kit. So we get a leg, a kidney, a jaw, or teeth. We get blood on filter paper. So there's a lot of different things that we collect, and we can measure loads of different things about health from those. And the second thing which we do through the community-based sampling is traditional knowledge documentation. So we incorporate the traditional knowledge of the local communities into the research to understand what the history of the caribou and the muskox is. So what were their kind of lives and their population health before scientific research was able to document it, and how that's changing today. Traditional knowledge provides us a huge insight into how caribou and muskoxen are doing and how things are changing for them.
That's really cool. Mm-hmm. And actually that's a great example too of going back to really One Health and the triad of the three areas, how the animal health is affecting the human health as well.
Yeah, in the north, communities such as Inuit and First Nations, their lives are so intertwined with the animals and the environment. So their lives are kind of an epitome of what One Health is. So we can learn so much from their communities and how the people have lived and the knowledge that they have.
So you gave us that context of like some of the Arctic animals, like, so we're talking about caribou, talking about muskoxen. I'm just curious, I don't know really anything about muskoxen now other than they're kind of like the underdog of Arctic animals. Can you tell us a bit more about them?
Absolutely. I find muskoxen a hugely fascinating creature. Their scientific name is Ovibos moschatus, which means, or kind of comes from ovi is sheep and bos is cow, but actually they're not really related to either. They're more related to goats than they are to either sheep or cows.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then I guess too, like we're talking about caribou, like are reindeer and caribou the same thing?
Reindeer and caribou are technically the same thing, so they're technically all rangifer species, and there's many subspecies of reindeer/caribou. Reindeer are generally the subspecies that are found in Eurasia, so in Russia and Northern Europe, and caribou are the species that are found in Northern America. So the caribou that we have in Canada and in the US.
Okay, so just geographic differences.
Yeah, geographic differences, yeah.
Cool.
So most reindeer are semi-domesticated through the northern herding communities in like Sweden and like northern Scandinavia and Russia. And then caribou haven't ever been semi-domesticated. So they're fully wild species that range North America.
Wow, thank you for sharing a bit more information on, these Arctic animals. Like I didn't know any of that. So with the approaches that you are developing, like how are you communicating these out to the community and into practice from our findings? Like just tell us more. What's the knowledge translation component of your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Communicating research back to communities is a huge priority for anyone doing research in the Arctic. For many years, when scientists would go up to the north to do research, they would go to the north, do their data collection and their research studies, and then they'd just leave. And so the research was very extractive, and many times, or most of the time, the communities wouldn't learn anything about what was found from the research or hear about any of the results. So it's really important to us that not only do we always make sure we report really clearly the results of this work back to communities, but we also co-interpret the results with community members or elders in the community or knowledge keepers or representatives of community organisations. So the results are relevant and also correct because they hold so much knowledge about how the animals and the environment work together. So having their input into the results is really important.
Yeah, you can see how that ivory tower piece, right, with research from the past, right? Like, so really breaking down those barriers. Yeah, that's really amazing.
And it's shifting the power of research as well, so that communities and organisations in the north have power in the research rather than people just coming to the north and doing research and then leaving again. And communicating the research back doesn't just mean sharing scientific papers or technical reports. We have to work together to make sure that when we're communicating back to the communities, the communications that we do are done in an engaging, understandable and respectful way. We have other ways of communicating our research as well. We have stakeholders and other partners that it's really important to communicate to.
Yeah, like who are these types of partners?
For example, we partner with Canada North Outfitting, who do guided sport hunts in Inuit communities with local Inuit guides. And so part of our communications is communicating the outcomes of the sample kits we get through them, and also communicating with their clients who are not only, they care a lot about wildlife conservation and research, but they also have the ability to potentially support it through philanthropy and other ways of supporting research.
My next question is really going, because you've talked about the local communities and how important this research is, and the animals to their spiritual well-being and their culture, and then you're talking about tourism companies or non-academic partners that you're communicating this research out to. So can you really speak to in your research or the importance of really building relationships and partnerships to really further research impact?
Yeah, building relationships to further our research impact is really important, especially when you're working in the north, because you're working in really remote communities where it's challenging to kind of do anything. The logistics are challenging and it's financially quite expensive to work in the north. So if you're going up to even just visit a community, it's potentially going to take you 2 to 3 days just to fly there and $4,000 to $5,000 for your flights. Having good relationships is key to being able to do the research that we do.
What advice would you give to other researchers who are looking to, start to build a partnership with Arctic communities?
The advice that I would give is to speak to other people who have relationships with northern communities or long-term research programs, because they will be the ones that know the best how to do it. I'm really lucky that Dr. Susan Kutz is the research lead of our program, and I get to work with her, and she's a really incredible mentor, but she also has many years of experience and many years of building relationships with people in the north. So those relationships that she's spent a long time building and cultivating, that's the reason that we can do what we all do today. So all of her students and postdocs, etc., can do the work we do because of her relationships. So definitely speaking to people who have that experience and then reaching out to communities, starting communications and conversations early is really important to make sure everyone's on the same page about what they want and want to get out of the research.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess people need to get past that. Like, you can't just go knock on someone's door and be like, hello, I would like to research things that impacts you tomorrow.
Yeah. Although sometimes it can work like that. We've just recently initiated the program in a new community, and it did start off with us emailing the Hunters and Trappers organisation to say, what's your need for caribou monitoring or muskox monitoring? And they were very forthcoming and very much like, we're worried about caribou and muskox health. So we are very interested.
Oh, that's good. Amazing. I guess you didn't start tomorrow, though.
No, it took a while still.
There we go. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So, Eleanor, thank you for sharing, the importance of the research that you're conducting and how this is going to improve, caribou and muskoxen health and, the indigenous and Inuit communities that live in the Arctic. But, you did receive the Innovation Postdoctoral Fellowship that the Faculty of Science gives out to members of the postdoc community across campus. What did it mean to you to receive that award? And my follow-up was did you see yourself as an innovator before you received it?
Yeah, I absolutely did not really see myself as an innovator before I received it. I applied for it because I thought it would be a good thing to apply for, and when I was thinking about what I could say in the application, it's made me really look at what I have done and how I'm contributing to developing things and potentially being an innovator. So I didn't expect it. I look at the other people who've had this type of award and they're all kind of innovating really big technological things in labs and doing all sorts, and the basis of the innovation that I do is communication and kind of developing approaches that we can use, but mainly how we can do it in partnerships and with communication. So yeah, it was really cool to see that what I'm doing is innovative, even if it's not on the same level as what other people are doing.
No, you're definitely a social innovator for sure, I would say. Yeah, you're not building widgets you're, we're talking about widgets on our last episode, so it's in my mind. But yeah, no, the work you're doing is so impactful and important. I think it's going to have huge impact on the communities and the animal population. So I really appreciate you, joining us today and telling us more about the work that you're doing.
Cool, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to talk about it more.
You can find links in our episode description to learn more about the Kutz Research Group and the Innovation Postdoctoral Fellowships. And to learn how to move your research to impact in the UCalgary innovation ecosystem, visit ucalgary.ca/innovation.